So we've talked a lot on the podcast, the three of us and with other guests and in the research that we've done, about the importance of the community being involved. And I think one of the things that is distinct about Rondo and so important is that it is driven by the community and by what the community wants to see. And so we were wondering specifically, what is the community backing behind the land bridge? Who is involved? How is it tied to the community in such an important way?
Right. Well, I'll say there's never an end to community voice.
Right.
It's a process, and folks are all over the continuum in terms of their understanding, because some of this gets a bit deep and complex because it goes beyond just simply a land bridge. In fact, let me reframe this a little bit for you, Rafi, because your question is so important. This is a transportation element that rests in a community that we can leverage towards community benefit. So it's just a tool to use, transportation, for community building. And so it's our aspiration to create an African-American cultural enterprise district connected by a land bridge. So what is that really saying? Well, Rondo was an African-American cultural enterprise district before the freeway went through. And so when we talk about asking questions of the community, we're asking the community, so what was Rondo? What was its social, cultural, economic, civic, business framework that was ultimately destroyed by the freeway? By listening to the community's aspirations, the ideas that are really important, those input points are very critical. One of the things that I'll say is I've had 2,000 conversations in 2022 myself directly with community members.
Wow.
Right? Our technical team, which we call a box of crayons, okay, are listening to these voices. It's almost like if we give the community a crayon and a piece of paper, what might you imagine? So those are the kinds of things that we've been doing with the community over the last 2 years, I would say, and trying to make sure that the voice of community is leading, but our technical team are the tools, the crayons, if you will, to create the technical case and to present back to the community what it is that we're hearing them say.
Is that their actual name? The Rondo's crayon box?
Well, I say we can use it.
I mean, one of my personal favorite parts of this project of being in this internship and this work, doing this work with you all, is the amount of collaboration we've done and the different people and groups and organizations we've talked to relating to transportation infrastructure. And it's really interesting to see, and I've said this before in previous episodes, it's interesting to see the different solutions being brought up for the same problem, the problem of displacement by highways and interstates. One of the organizations we've talked with and collaborated with is the Claiborne Avenue Alliance in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, who wants to completely remove the highway in their neighborhood. And so also as the Youth Council, we've done lots of research on the negative environmental, sustainable, and social impacts of highways. And so I was wondering why a land bridge was chosen to be the vessel of revitalization for the Rondo neighborhood.
Right. That's such an important question because every community is different.
Right.
Tremaine, Claiborne Avenue, it's a freeway that towers over and through a community and devastated the main business vehicle within that community. For Minnesota, I-94 was cut into the ground and doesn't tower over the community,
like a ditch.
Right? But it did separate, created this crevasse, right, between it. When we think about Detroit, is another example. In Detroit, they're eliminating a portion of the freeway that no longer is functioning. So they're going to remove that and create a boulevard.
Right.
So one size doesn't fit all.
No.
But the thing that I really want to emphasize is that who leads in the decision matters.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ask the question of the origin, I think I explained that a bit. In 2009, when there were no stops along the Central Light Rail corridor, part of the community advocacy was not only do we want these stops in our community, but why don't you replace the land that was taken in the 50s? let's create a cap or a land bridge. And so that's how the idea of a land bridge emerged, and we're carrying that forward in what we're doing today.
Right, and I love that. Like you said it, like there is no one size fits all. Like just because something is working and functioning good for another community does not mean it's going to do that for every other community. Every community has its own needs, its own people, its own culture.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Erica said about researching other organizations. You know, ever since the Interstate Highway Act of 1956, all these communities have been trying to do some restorative justice to get it back, get the communities back. But in some communities, they're still facing displacement, like in Houston and Overtown. But even with these restorative movements like the Claiborne Avenue Alliance, there's concern about more displacement, gentrification, coming from these projects that will seek investment. Investment from who, right?
Right.
So, you know, Reconnect Rondo has done some anti-displacement studies. So how will Reconnect Rondo implement that on the land bridge?
Right. Well, let me start off by saying the idea of a cap or a land bridge is not new.
Oh yeah, it's been done on, you know, Target Field and
Absolutely. And when I even think about, you know, our trip to Seattle, Seattle has more land bridges than any place in the country.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
But usually they're there connecting wealthy communities or park space.
Right.
Right.
Or stadiums.
Well, in this instance, for Target Field, because it sits over the freeway, you've got Lowry Tunnel as an example, is a way in which people can kind of feel what it's like to go underneath something that's on top. But the question about displacement is a real concern, and it's a legitimate concern. And in every conversation we have, that is the concern that's in the forefront. And our anti-displacement work is intended to make sure that we have guardrails in place in advance. Let's think about the Central Light Rail Corridor just as the example. As I mentioned, the Central Light Rail Corridor came through, no stops in Rondo. The community pushed back, but there was no anti-displacement plan.
it just happened.
It just happened.
Right.
Right? So no guardrails were put in place. Right? And so what happened? Development started happening like it's out of control along University Avenue, and people can't afford to live there anymore. Well, we're several years ahead of that in our planning. We've just concluded our anti-displacement plan, but it's not just about anti-displacement, it's also about community investment. Both have got to be hand in hand. The anti-displacement work is intended to ensure that guardrails are in place, that we don't have the kind of out of control rising of taxes, out of control lacking of being able to afford living in your community anymore. But I'll say this too, with or without the land bridge, displacement is happening.
Yeah.
Right? And so our planning ahead to put guardrails in place at least has something to it that can protect or provide greater protection for the community than what currently exists.
Right. So it seems to be all about proactively being against displacement rather than reacting to it if and when it happens.
I mean, absolutely. You know, Erica, I also want to just kind of grab back a part of your earlier question about, you know, those transportation projects that tower over or environmental issues, because I don't want to miss that point that you raised. Everything that we do is about restoration, the restoration of health.
Right.
Right? The restoration of business, the restoration of an educational framework, the restoration of addressing those things that improve or have worked against improved quality of life for people, right? And so everything we do is centered and grounded in that. Part of that is the anti-displacement study, community investment. But I just really want to note that this is also about carbon reduction.
Exactly.
This is about water resource planning and water resource engineering, blue-green infrastructure planning. So it goes well beyond, and that's why I say this is a transportation element. I call it a blank canvas. If we wanted to address health issues, how can this transportation project help usher in ideas that help us build an improved quality of life for people?
Thank you for watching our podcast. If you like what you see, give us a like. hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell to get notified when we put out new podcast episodes.